Hey, welcome! Today, we're cracking open an ancient rule book, and trust me, it's fascinating. We're going to explore how one society built this incredibly detailed system for justice, worship, and just keeping the community in balance. So let's dive into the world of the offerings you find in the book of Leviticus.
You know that feeling, right, when you've messed up and you just need to make it right? Well, imagine a world where the process for doing that was spelled out in minute detail, where it wasn't just about saying sorry, but about taking very specific actions and performing actual rituals. That's exactly what we're going to get into. So here's our roadmap. We'll start with how they handled wrongs between people. Then we'll look at their constant acts of worship, check out offerings that were all about gratitude, and dive into some really interesting rituals for purification. And then, at the end, we'll pull it all together to see why this whole system was so important to them.
Okay, first up, the guilt offering. And this wasn't some vague, abstract idea. Nope, this was a super practical system for social justice. It was designed to handle real-world problems you might have with your neighbor. We're talking theft, lying, finding something and pretending you didn't, or cheating someone in a business deal.
So, what did you actually have to do? The path to fixing things was laid out, step by step. First, you had to admit you were guilty. Can't skip that. Then, you had to give back whatever you took. But that's not all. You also had to add a penalty on top of it. And finally, you brought a special offering to the priest to get right with both the community and with God.
And this is where it gets really concrete. That penalty, it wasn't just some token gesture. The law required you to add a fifth of the value. That's a full 20% surcharge. Think about that. You didn't just pay back what you owed, you had to make the person you wronged more than whole. It created a real, tangible consequence.
Okay, so the guilt offering was all about fixing problems between people. But this next one, the burnt offering, it's about something totally different. We're shifting gears from specific sins to this idea of maintaining a constant, unbroken connection with the divine. This one line from the text really says it all. The fire on the altar wasn't just for a one-off ceremony. It was a living symbol of unending devotion, a constant presence connecting the people to God, 24/7. It was so important that it could never, ever go out.
And keeping that flame alive was a massive part of a priest's daily grind. Every single evening, an offering was put on the altar to burn all through the night. Then, first thing in the morning, the priest would get dressed in special linen clothes, clear out yesterday's ashes, and lay new firewood to get the altar ready for the day ahead. It was this constant, disciplined cycle of worship.
All right, let's talk about the grain offering. Now, this one is different again. It wasn't really about sin or even devotion in the same way. This was basically a gift. It was a way of saying thank you for the harvest, for the food from the land. And it also served a really practical purpose. It supported the priests who didn't own land of their own.
But the priests couldn't just take this food home and have a casual dinner. Oh no, there were some seriously strict rules. The grain had to be baked and eaten without yeast. They could only be eaten in the holy courtyard area. It was considered most holy, and get this, that holiness was seen as transferable. Anything that touched the offering also became holy, and it was only for the men in the priestly line.
And this is where a really crucial distinction comes in. See, when a regular person brought a grain offering, a symbolic piece was burned and the rest went to the priests to eat. But if a priest brought his own grain offering, say on the day he was ordained, the entire thing had to be burned. He wasn't allowed to eat his own offering. It symbolized that his gift was completely and totally forgotten.
Now we get to our fourth category, the sin offering. This one was all about cleansing and purity, usually for when someone broke a sacred rule without even meaning to. And it's here that we see how the idea of holiness had very real physical consequences.
So, to really get the next part, you have to understand this term, most holy. It doesn't just mean very holy. It means something is so completely set apart for God's purpose that its actual nature is different. And remember that transferable quality? The idea that this intense holiness could literally rub off on things? Keep that in mind. Which brings us to this incredibly specific rule for the sin offering. The priests were allowed to eat the meat from this particular offering, but afterward, the clay pot they cooked it in, it had to be smashed into pieces. You have to wonder, right? Why go to such an extreme?
Well, the logic is actually all about the materials. Clay is porous. It soaks things up. So in their view, it would permanently absorb the most holy status of the food. It was contaminated with holiness, if you will.
And since you couldn't scrub it clean, it had to be destroyed. But a bronze pot? That's non-porous. The holiness would just be on the surface, so you could just scour it, rinse it, and it was good to go.
But there was one huge exception. For the absolute most serious sins, the blood from the offering was actually brought inside the most sacred part of the sanctuary. And when that happened, the meat from that animal was considered too holy for anyone to eat, not even the high priest. The whole thing had to be taken outside the camp and burned completely.
Okay, so we've looked at all these different offerings and their peculiar rules. Now let's zoom out and look at the big picture. Because this wasn't just a random list of regulations. It was a complete, interconnected system.
You see how each piece had its own job? The guilt offering handled justice between people. The burnt offering kept that constant connection to the divine humming along. The grain offering was the channel for thankfulness and for supporting the community structure. And the sin offering gave people a clear path to get clean and make amends. Together, it was a whole framework designed to keep life, both social and spiritual, in balance.
What this ancient system really shows us is this deep human need for structure, a process for making things right. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? What are our modern rituals for this? Think about it, from the legal system with its fines and restitution to just the simple act of buying a friend dinner to say you're sorry. How do we, today, try to find justice, stay connected, and make things right? Something to chew on. Thanks for tuning in.